Greetings, this is Obi-Wan Kenobi, and I have drifted into the underworld. The Star Wars underworld. I have a bad feeling about this.
Here we go. We must go to the lower levels. The underworld.
You've taken your first step into a larger world.
You're after something.
Ben.
Since I've started the underworld, I've met so many great friends.
Chris.
I grew up in the 1990s, and mall packaging is nostalgic for me.
Dominic.
What I love most about Star Wars is that it's fun, and it's all-around good times.
So, this is where the fun begins.
May the Force be with us.
This thing really moves!
Whoa! I like this!
I can't believe you came all this way to see me.
Ah, there we go. Now you can see us. What's up,
Dramatic pause.
What's up, Star Wars fans? And welcome back to another episode of the Star Wars Underworld podcast. We are Source. This just messed me up completely.
Take two. Don't worry.
Yeah.
We got this. We got this.
We are Source.
We are Source.
That's right.
We are Source. We're light source, energy source, power source.
Okay.
Force source.
Force. We are the Force. We're changing our name to the Force Source after this. That is our new. That is the announcement, guys. Sorry. That is the announcement.
That's it.
We are now the Force Source. All right. What's up, Star Wars fans, and welcome back to another episode of the Star Wars Underworld podcast. We are your source for the latest breaking Star Wars news and discussion each and every week. And this week on the show, we're going to be discussing the relationship between Star Wars on paper and on screen. We've got lots of Andor updates as we quickly approach the series premiere. And, did we mention we have another huge announcement on the way? All that and much more on this episode. My name is Chris, and joining me is my good friend, Mr. Dominic Jones.
Hello, Chris. Hello, Hannah. Hello, everybody. Another big announcement, another big week. Very excited for this. You say the release date of Andor is quickly approaching. I feel it's going too slowly. I really feel that this has been drawn out too much. But I'm looking forward to getting into some Star Wars book stuff this week. It's been far too long since we've talked about it on the show, and I like taking this sort of big picture approach to it because I am woefully behind in my Star Wars books. There have been a lot of Star Wars books that have come out this summer, and I have read, I think there are 5 have come out. I've read 2.5 of them. So I'm really behind. Got to get caught up before we do a proper deep dive. But it's going to be a great show.
Somehow, the 2 most clearly seen books in your background are the only 2 Star Wars books I have read. So that is perfect. You did very, very well done. I've definitely read those 2 that you can clearly see. Also joining us, it's Hannah Raeside.
G'day there. It is so good to be here, guys. And yeah, like you, Dominic, I'm a little bit behind in my book reading of Star Wars, even though there's so much out there. But I'm slowly clawing my way back up. I'm like halfway through Bloodline at the moment. I've got a couple of High Republic books lined up to read after that. So I am very excited. I've got a lot of things to say about books and Star Wars and how good they are. So it's going to be a really fun show. I'm really excited.
Yeah, I think this is going to be a good chance to kind of, like I said, take a big picture approach at some books, and as Chris said, the relationship between the books and what's on screen. Because, in theory, at least, it's all supposed to be connected. It's all supposed to relate to each other. It's all supposed to bounce off each other.
I like
but
that one.
yeah, but we'll see. We'll see. There's a lot of space between my forefinger and my pinky because I feel there is a real gap between what they say happens and what isn't happening.
Yeah.
This is why you tune into the video version for the hand gestures.
You gotta see the video. Like, if you watch listening audio, you need to watch the video.
All right, you know what? We got to get this back on track, and you know how we do that? By making a big freaking announcement. And the big announcement is not, strangely, that Ben Hart, the Star Wars guy, is not here this week. Because, and this is true, he's recording another podcast. That snake.
Traitor.
That snake.
Traitor.
Who was that?
Where's the traitor trooper?
Yeah. No, he's recording an episode of IPC, and we look forward to listening to it.
Legends.
Eventually. But we do have a big announcement this week. As we talked about last week, we are expanding into the Star Wars Underworld Network. And last week, we, of course, revealed that Hannah, you've joined up, talked about the Raeside, all of that exciting stuff. And we're bringing on another show. So without further ado, let's welcome to the show Ion Canon, Matthew and Joel. Guys, thank you both for being here. Of course, Ion Canon is the latest addition to the Star Wars Underworld Network. It's a podcast all about Star Wars books, comics, canon, and beyond. How's that for a pitch? I like that pitch. I just made that up right now. But let's meet our hosts, our newest additions to the Star Wars Underworld. Matthew, over to you first. You are, of course, a longtime friend of the show and our senior religion correspondent.
That is correct. And as you can see, I am here in front of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, waiting where the High Council is making their rare visit to the Reconciliation Tower for a great solemn gathering where they are going to elect the next Grand Master to join Masters Laru and Prate Vader. Just behind me here in one of these towers back here, you can't see it too clearly. I'm of course in a media pod on Coruscant, just outside the temple. And just in a few short hours, you will see coming out of this tower some green smoke to signify the momentous occasion of the election of a leader of a new leader for the Jedi Order. It is a momentous day for the Order, for Star Wars Underworld, for Ion Canon, and I am happy to be here.
Amazing. Joel, you want to try and top that with your intro, buddy?
I had to pay a bunch of super chats just to be here. Like, it was super expensive, was super worth it. I'm probably broke now, but that's okay. That would make a good palace. I'm just saying. That would make a very lovely palace.
It would.
For someone. Or for an emperor, maybe. I'm just saying. Very, very good-looking emperor.
Indeed. Well, welcome to both of you. Welcome to the Star Wars Underworld Network. We're so excited to have Ion Canon joining. I'm going to give each of you a little chance to introduce yourselves and talk about what it means to you to be joining such an esteemed institution. Such an esteemed institution as the Star Wars Underworld.
That's too intense.
Matthew, over to you first.
Well, okay, I'm gonna be serious because my first point is actually a serious point. Is Star Wars? Yes, it's a fun adventure story set in a galaxy far, far away, and that's true. And it has deep themes and important spiritual themes. It is first and foremost about the actual people in the real world that we actually get to meet and get to know. And yes, I'm going serious immediately here. And so, what this means to be part of SWU with the SWU podcast network, have the banner be here on this channel every Monday night, to be tied in. It's a continuation, in part, yes, of the logistical, practical, and spiritual, ideological support, whatever that you, Dom, Chris, and Ben have given us over the last 8 months, over the last year. Dom even coming up with a name, different, bringing us into the fold, things like that. But more importantly, it's an extension of the actual friendships and connections that we've developed. Dom, getting to know you over the last 4 years personally, 4 or 5 years, just the 2018 Toronto Star Wars party, and Chris and Ben and Hannah, getting to know you guys, just over the last year especially, but over the last bit. And then to say, Joel, you know what, you and I, we've been going 8 months. At first we had to kind of put the stove together, install it, find the ingredients, figure out what this was going to do. Then we had to turn the thing on, using another metaphor here. Stick the meat on the thing, on the frying pan. I know.
You're taking Ben's job from the barbecue.
I'm gonna go on here.
You're committed.
Start to heat up, start to sizzle, start to build. And Joel, you and I are cooking, and we've gotten a really great rhythm about what this show is about, what we care about doing and how we go about it. And obviously lots of tweaks along the way and different things, but we've come to a place where we're here to say something. We're here to talk about deeper issues, talk about canon, all the stories that are coming out there, and highlight those, how the brilliant artists and creatives that are putting forth these stories that are as compelling to a lot of us as anything you see on screen. And I mean, I'm just it signifies that we've come to this place, and so to have that explicit backing, yes, we had it with Culture Slate, we had it with the Fandom Fam together, but to say, we're here and we're here to stay.
Yes.
Ooh,
yes.
well
I have.
done,
Yeah, we have no intention of kicking you out. Not anytime
Sure,
soon.
yeah.
At the very least, you
That-
said that.
that's a good
You made that such a statement there. We're here to stay. You were
They'll
planting
have
your
to
flag.
unpack up the stove. They'll
Yeah.
have
Let
some-
the take us both down.
Is anyone hungry? I know. Is anyone...
I am now. Joel, over to you again. Care to follow that? Good luck.
Well, years of sending emails has finally paid off. I did it. I'm living the dream. But no, I've been listening to Underworld since, it's probably all the way back since before The Force Awakens. I think I've listened to every episode of Live from the Fall.
Wow.
Every episode of Kazuda Cast, all the Bad Batch episodes. I don't think I've watched all the Clone Wars ones, but I came in a little late. I definitely watched the newer ones. I remember that live call-in show you used to have every couple of months. That was always fun. And no, I've been listening to you guys for years. Probably even longer, maybe. I don't know if I'm longer than you, Matthew, at this point. I don't know. Probably. Following every news, catching you guys every Thursday. I don't know if you've been doing it every Thursday for years since the beginning.
Pretty much.
And then sending in emails and sending super chats and wow, just like you never thought I'd actually be on the show and just it's kind of like a partner in this wider network. But like this last year especially is like really kind of deepened my involvement in the fandom and the spaces and the creativity. So it's like, I feel like I'm living the dream right now, and it's been great. And I hope to keep going for as long as I can till I drop, pretty much.
Yeah. Well, we're so excited to have both of you and to have Eye on Canon on the show. And it is Eye on Canon. It's a pun, you see, because all the best jokes you have to explain. But it's Eye on Canon because these two are paying attention to the canon, to the books, the comics, the games, and the shows and the movies, unlike anybody else, at least on our network at the moment. But I do want to say, I just on a personal level for me, how thrilled I am to have the two of you on the network. I don't know how much of the behind the scenes of how your show came together, how much of that story you've told over the years, but I will tell it from my perspective, which is I've known Matthew for several years now, and I knew you were doing your other show back in the day. And I remember you were telling me one time that you were wanting to expand into a different kind of show, something that was more like what you guys do now. And I also knew that, Chris, you had been working with Joel over at Culture Slate, and that Joel was looking for somebody to do a similar kind of show like that. And I, having heard these two stories on separate occasions, went, I've got an idea. So I told Chris, and then Chris, you kind of took it and ran with it and got things together. And then you guys, the two of you, have started up the show, and it's been running for 8 months. And it's been such fun to see you both evolve and grow as podcasters through the years. So
I was going to say, Dominic, thank you. And also, me and Matt, I wanted to add, because I feel like I didn't say this part, but yeah, I agree with everything Matthew said. Like, we've been cooking, we've been sizzling, and I still think one of the best times, two best times I've had are the IHOP party, which was probably the greatest moment of my life.
Good answer.
That's nothing going to top that. I think I'm going to die happy when just think of that IHOP party. And second greatest moment is the day after celebration when Matthew, you and I just sort of hung out at downtown Disney together and just walked around. I think that was.
And I saw you.
Yeah, you were there too, Hannah.
Yeah.
You were there. And we had probably just had a nice lunch together, and that was like kind of amazing because I don't really get out much because I might get a little too personal, but I'm disabled, so I'm physically disabled, so it's hard to get out. So this is my social interaction time, and it's like, yes, I'm making it. I'm finally making it. So I guess I have to thank you, Dominic, for making this all happen.
Yeah, see, the whole point of me telling that story was because I wanted kudos here, and thank you for giving them to me, Joel. But obviously, since the two of you are here, we're going to get into some book stuff. But we'll get into that in a moment because we've got some other things to plug off the top here. But I will say, before we hit the plugs, Chris, this isn't the last announcement. There are more to come.
True.
Possibly even next week, possibly the week after that, and possibly beyond. There is more cooking on these strange stoves that we have been building.
Yeah, we're building our own stoves. Like, I've never built a stove.
Yeah, every
Stop
stove is different. Like some are gas stoves, some are like an old school wood stove, some are electric. You know, you have different options. But more announcements coming next week and beyond. This is, as we said, just the beginning. Still,
there's a reason why Dex has lots of arms.
Yes,
because there are so many stoves.
That's the metaphor, Joel. There it is.
We're building a grand kitchen.
There we go.
Of course.
Making all the Jawaji's.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Bam.
All right. So before we get to the news, we want to remind everybody to punch that subscribe button. Chewy, if you have not subbed to the Star Wars Underworld, because now not only are you going to get the stuff that you've been getting, but you're going to be getting Ion Canon as well over here on the Star Wars Underworld channel. So if you're coming from the Ion Canon channel and you don't sub to the Star Wars Underworld because all you care about is Star Wars books, you got to subscribe to us now. That's our evil plan. We're going to get everybody to subscribe to us. So please subscribe to our channel. Since Joel is here, there's no one to super chat, so we need someone to do that.
I know.
So definitely a super chat so we can have another IHOP party, and that will involve shipping an entire IHOP to London, which is very expensive. So
yeah,
we need
to
do
London.
Oh yeah.
You can also
we may actually be literally building some stoves. If that's the case.
The next celebration we build our own IHOP and we make the stoves, isn't it?
If you build it, they will come. You can become a channel member as well to support us, and you can go to patreon.com/TSW.
It's the weirdest Field of Dreams spin-off you've ever heard of.
What have I done?
I just saw the baseball hat, and I'm like, I need to.
Yeah,
Kevin Costner's in a kitchen somewhere building together a stove while James Earl Jones is watching and be like, that's not how this works. Come on.
Can you make pancakes out of corn? Because if so, this will work out. Maze cake.
I want to be James Earl Jones.
You can check out the patreon.com/TheSWU link where you can watch our pre-shows. We had a really fun and animated pre-show where we found out all the things Ben Hart has been up to. Ben Hart's been up to a lot throughout a lot of time too.
So many secrets.
Back in the MySpace day over in Australia, back in ancient Canada.
19th century.
The Dominion of Canada, thank you. The British want to be remembered.
And Dom, tell us, do you have anything new on Hot Off the Press?
I've got a new one coming out this weekend. We're taking a step away from Star Wars for this week. We're going to talk a little House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones. Have some fun with that. You can read those on Hot Off the Press. And you can, of course, read the previous two installments about Andor and Lego Star Wars Summer Vacation. If you've seen Lego Star Wars Summer Vacation because it's been released in your territory, I understand there are some other places in the world where it hasn't been released. But you can find those by going to DominicGJones.substack.com.
Awesome. And speaking of stoves, Hannah, what has been cooking over at the Raeside?
What's cooking? Oh,
Literally.
we had such a fun show last week. We made edible lightsabers out of icing and breadsticks. It took like 2 hours. It was a lot more messy than I expected, but it was super, super fun. And next week, I'm having a really special show where we're doing a Kenobi series rewatch. We're watching it live together. So we're watching the first 3 episodes in one sitting. So bring your snacks, bring your popcorn. And go subscribe over at the Raeside, and you can watch along the first 3 episodes of Kenobi with me live. And then obviously the next 3 episodes we'll do the following week as well. But yeah, so much fun over there. We're having a great time.
Check that out. So search for the Raeside on YouTube and you will find that channel. Unless Joel is typing an email right now, there might be an opening at swunderworld@gmail.com for someone else to send in an email. So send in your listener feedback, swunderworld@gmail.com, and make sure that you subscribe and review to our show on any podcast feeds that you're listening to us on. And with all the announcements, there's so many things to talk about, but I think I covered everything.
I think so. I think
that's
so.
it.
Yeah, we may have to, we moved the plugs up. We used to do the plugs at the end of the show, and then we moved them up to the beginning. I'm starting to think we may have to put them back at the end of the show again.
Well, you know what? I can do just a fast go through one next week where we just say do this, and it's done in like 30 seconds.
Nah. No
Yeah.
need
Throw
to
it out
do
this
We're
week.
good.
Nah.
It's good. It's
Oh
good.
yeah, this one. Percy
that one
Liz.
too.
Oh,
That one too.
nice.
On the Instagram. All right. So we're not going to get into the news just yet because, we'd just be going over more Andor stuff, and we've talked about that to death. And we will talk about it a little bit more coming up later in the show. But as we said off the top, we want to talk some Star Wars books, and we want to talk about the relationship between the books and the comics and the movies and the TV shows, and just this whole big picture idea of canon, since we have 2 people on the show who have quite literally their eyes on canon. So how we're going to start this is I want to get everybody's kind of history with Star Wars books off the hop. So in, let's say, 45 seconds or less, we're going to go around the table, 45 seconds or less each. We're going to kind of go around the table, and I'm going to get from everybody your sort of introduction to Star Wars books, what your favorite Star Wars book is, and if you're reading anything right now. So Joel, we will start with you. Your 45 seconds or less history and present day with Star Wars books.
Oh gosh, okay. So my it begins in school. I saw the Thrawn trilogy in the library. I had no idea what continuity was, and I didn't understand why Darth Vader wasn't there. So I didn't read it until years later when I became a teenager and went to Wikipedia and just looked up a bunch of articles and realized, oh wow, there's a lot more to Star Wars than just the movies. Then I started reading the books again. I read the Thrawn trilogy, really liked it. Understood what continuity was, and that there could be different continuities and different universes, like with Spider-Man and Marvel and Batman. And then when Disney decided to reboot in 2014, I decided, well, they're going to start afresh. So I decided to start afresh with the books. I read a bunch of them from Bloodline to Aftermath. And I kept going and going. And it's like, I love the idea of like everything kind of building this one singular universe as it expands and grows and changes over time. And I've just kept at it ever since. And right now I'm reading The Princess and the Scoundrel, which is really good. So, yeah, that is my very brief history with Star Wars books.
Nice. A brief history of Star Wars books. I like that. Matthew, you next.
Yeah, so my history with Star Wars books, my history with Star Wars fandom is really at the 2015 changeover. I was a fan of another franchise that has Star in it. I still am a fan of that. But
Battlestar
2015 changeover. Yes, I'm a fan of that too. The changeover really was an opportunity to start fresh. Yes, the promise of a single continuity. We know it's more complicated, and we'll get into that in a bit. But to say, okay, I have a bit of a completist personality. So the comics, I'm going to get my comics on the pull list every single Wednesday. Going to go for that. So I have gone a completist for at least the Marvel comics. Definitely going into the Dark Horse now. I did have a bit of the Legends novels, the EU novels. Definitely read Darth Plagueis. But my relationship with the novels was, okay, am I going to do this in 2015? Am I going to dive in or not? And I did end up diving in pretty full throttle, especially with the Aftermath trilogy and Bloodline and Lost Stars. And then beginning of 2021, it hit a new gear with High Republic, which became my favorite thing in Star Wars for 2021. It still is, I think, currently my favorite thing. Everything I really want of an interconnected story that doesn't have to worry about what happens on screen all that much. So have that focus, but also with the EOC, having a bit of a niche and a bit of a focus to say, okay, we're going to do this. You guys are free to explore what you do and what you don't want to do and what you don't have time to do. We are going to look at all these stories and all these books. So yes, trying to be as caught up as I can with definitely Shadow of the Sith and Padawan, and now of course in Brotherhood, the Business on Cademoidia, and now of course with Princess and the Scoundrel. You're all invited to Han and Leia's wedding.
Hannah, you're up next.
I'm a real newbie to the Star Wars books. Similar kind of story of just is like the late Disney handover, like 2018, like Last Jedi kind of period, where I really just got that resurgence for Star Wars again, and I was loving the sequels, just loved rewatching everything and watching Clone Wars, and then that's kind of realization that there's actually more to this universe, that isn't just going to be on a screen. There's so much out there. There's so many stories out there that are in books. So I'm very, like I said at the start in the intro, I'm very slowly clawing my way into Star Wars novels. And I'm really enjoying it. What I like, the select ones I've read so far, I've just been thrilled with, and I really think it's an incredible world of storytelling, because there's a lot of things that books can do that movies can't. So yeah, I just think it's such a promising thing for Star Wars to have so many amazing books and so many amazing writers. But very, very new to it, but very excited by it.
Nice.
That's my story.
Chris?
I'm going to say something that people don't talk about a lot on podcasts, which is my introduction to Star Wars books was kids' books. Because I grew up as a Star Wars fan as a kid, since I was 4 years old. So as a 4-year-old, I couldn't even read when I was first introduced to Star Wars books. My parents would read me Star Wars books. I remember there was this book about the Millennium Falcon that was a kid's picture book. And I think it was from like the 1980s, because that thing was beat up by the time that I got to it. So I remember my parents reading me that book very, very often when I was like 4 or 5 years old. I think my first introduction to a lot of Star Wars films was through books. I think that there was a kid's picture book it told the story of Return of the Jedi that came with a cassette tape of someone reading the book with sound effects. It was almost like an audio drama. And I'm pretty sure that I listened to that cassette tape along with reading the book and looking at the pictures before I even saw Return of the Jedi, the movie. And I read the young adult versions, novelizations of the prequels before I saw any of the films in theaters, because the books would come out before back in the day. So definitely I kind of like grew into Star Wars books from picture books to young adult books to eventually the Thrawn trilogy, which I read when I was old enough to comprehend that level of novel. And that would probably, I would say, is the pinnacle of Star Wars books for me. I think that's very worthy 7, 8, and 9. If we were to never have gotten the sequel films, I think those stories would still hold up, today as a good conclusion and third act to the Star Wars saga. And I love how so many elements of them are being put into canon now, and there's so many elements that still need to be put in canon. Marjay, and many other things. Yes. So currently, I've not read a book in a while. For some reason, the pandemic actually got me out of reading books, which is weird because for most people, I think it gave them more time to do it. But for me, I actually haven't read much since then. So I still have a few Star Wars books that I really want to read that are just sitting on the bookshelf waiting for me to actually pick them up. Dark Disciple and Lost Stars are two that are at the top of my list to get to.
Correct choices.
I agree. For me, the first Star Wars novel I read was The Glove of Darth Vader.
Wow,
and
that's amazing.
shockingly,
that's amazing.
It didn't scare me off reading Star Wars novels ever since then, despite its frankly absurd nature. So I read the Glove of Darth Vader, thinking like, is this what Star Wars books are all like? Is this how they all are? And then shortly thereafter, I was introduced to the Young Jedi Knights series that Kevin J. Anderson and Rebecca Moesta wrote back in the day, and I really, really got into those. Funnily enough, there are, I believe, 15 books in that series. I've only ever read 14. I've never been able to find the final novel in that series, and thus it has been left incomplete throughout my entire life. But I got into those, and then I got into, much like Chris, I read the junior novelization for Revenge of the Sith. And then from there, when Revenge of the Sith came out, I kind of put Star Wars aside. But when I was ready to jump back into it, I wanted to, go all in. And that's when I started getting into the books. And that was around the time of the Fate of the Jedi series and the expanded universe. So not necessarily the greatest time, but also, when you start with the Glove of Darth Vader, everything seems wonderful in comparison. And when they reset the canon in 2015, I was very excited because I had felt that the old expanded universe, the Legends verse as it's now known, was a little too dense. It was a little too difficult to jump into. There weren't good starting places. And I felt that, this reset gave everybody a chance to reset, to start over. And I feel like the new canon has done a better job, but not a perfect job at making sure there are new entry points for readers. Sometimes I feel like it gets a little too self-referential. As much as I loved the book Resistance Reborn, that book means nothing if you haven't read all of this other stuff that had come out in the years previous to it. So it's very. It's a varied thing. It can be hit, it can be miss. But right now, like I said off the top, I'm a bit behind on my Star Wars books. Of the 5 that have come out this summer, I've read Brotherhood and Queen's Peril, I want to say it's called. Queen's Hope, that's the one.
Yeah.
That's the one. And I'm about halfway through, is it Secrets of the Sith or Shadow of the Sith? Yeah. So about halfway through it, and have not yet gotten to Princess and the Scoundrel or Padawan. But I'm looking forward to getting to those eventually. But yeah, let's talk about this idea of canon, because it's a kind of an absurd idea in and of its face. Like let's be real. Like not to insult the the Ion Canon crew.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah. Welcome to the network, guys. What you do is absurd. No, but it is this kind of sort of funny thing we demand of our fiction now, which is we want all of these stories that are written and told by different people, and especially in Star Wars across different mediums. And we expect them all to tie together perfectly and cohesively and to build on each other, so that, if you read one book, that will improve your experience watching a movie, which will improve your experience watching a TV show, which will improve your experience reading a comic, which will then return to improving your experience with a book, and on like that. So I'll throw this out, and anyone can take this. Anybody who wants to dare to tackle this absurd subject, this absurd question that I'm throwing out here.
I'll do it.
What should canon be in your mind? What should make something canon? What should it be?
So to me, canon are the choices made in these fictional stories that have ramifications on the future stories being told out of universe. So here's my example. Palpatine coming back in Rise of Skywalker. You don't have to like it. You can love it. You can hate it. But it needs to impact the future stories being told backwards and forward. So when you're telling stories pre-Rise of Skywalker, you can only go so far with what the Empire can do, because ultimately we know what the ending is going to be like. Endgame is Palpatine's on Exegol, and he's doing his thing. Same with, I guess, Luke in Last Jedi, right? Luke in Last Jedi, his Jedi Order failed. He gave up. He's now going to be on Octu being sad, lonely Luke. So you can only go so far with what Luke can do in the Mandoverse before you have to remind yourself, oh yeah, Kylo's going to screw all that up and he's going to go hit the hay. But also things in the books as well, like, you don't need the things like Ahsoka's lightsaber color. That doesn't matter. What matters is her trajectory as a character. She's going to become Fulcrum. In Aftermath, the Empire defeated. There was this Operation Cinders thing, but now the Empire is now gone. There are now remnants of it, but they left a lot of destruction in their wake. So, to me, that's what a canon is in terms of making a universe. It's like, you can't just say the Mandoverse, as much as I think some people really want to have Luke Skywalker get the 1,000 new Jedi, and he's going to be crowned the great Jedi Master of old, and it's all going to fight the Yuzon Vong, and Han and Leia's kids are going to be named Jaina and Jason. That can't happen. There has to be, when Han and Leia show up with their kid, it will be Ben Solo. Luke's academy can only go so far. Rey will be born. Finn will be born. To me, those big events, that is what matters. Whether or not, again, like Ahsoka's lightsaber color, or, maybe the Bad Batch were there for Kanan's death or Kanan's master's death or not. That stuff is like, the grand story still remains the same. Just the details, they can kind of change, but as long as the grand story, the kind of trajectory is there, that to me is what canon's all about. Seeing how all these stories build up on each other in terms of the big events, what they're adding, how they're shaping the universe. So, that to me is what canon's all about.
Yeah. It's the story, it's the broad strokes of the story, essentially. And everything else that comes from that. We're in real in real metaphor territory here. It's sort of the ripples that go.
I've got another one for you in a minute too.
All right, let's go, Hannah. let's keep these metaphors rolling, Hannah.
Yeah, I love it because because I totally agree in the sense that, the canon is there to expand, but there's two ways it expands. It either expands something that already exists, and like what Joel you're saying, it kind of elongates its trajectory. Wow, I'm really struggling with that word, and keeps it going and driving a character or story or concept forward. Or the other thing it does is, when you put on, funny enough, I've never done this, but like a VR headset, and you're like in a new place and you can look around like in all directions. That to me is essentially what a lot of these, especially these days, this new canon is doing, is that. And I find it funny when people complain that, we've got enough, Empire time, or we've got enough, the dark, that move on. But it's like, no, but there's actually so much in there still. Like, we can go to any point in, the High Republic, or, any time in the Skywalker saga, and we can put ourselves there. And books essentially give us a 360 view of what's happening around the films and shows that we've seen visually. And I think that's what makes them so interesting, because I think everyone, when you pick up any kind of Star Wars book, you think in the back of your mind, you're subconsciously thinking, where's this going to connect? What's this going to got to do with? Who's going to and then we're going to get a character name drop in here that's from somewhere else, or even just that planet. And it's that 360 VR headset view that we get from books that we would have to make 10 shows a year to get that level of, coverage.
Soon. That's
it's coming.
That's coming down.
We're not Marvel guys.
Hey, not Rocky either.
Yeah,
not yet.
So I mean, the reason why we grasp for metaphors is because it's an abstract concept, and so we need to have ways of speaking of it in concrete terms, and metaphors are the way we do it. I will go literal here and say the first thing I do whenever I look at a story is all about character. I mean, yes, plot is a fundamental element of this, but if there are multiple plots in different stories and different novels and comics and whatnot over a period of time, well, let's look at what the character continuity is, and how does one character, how does a character go from one place in one novel to another place in another novel to a film on screen. So the great example of the last few months is in the last few years, I should say, is Obi-Wan Kenobi, for example, the one that comes to mind. We had Padawan, we have Brotherhood, we had Master and Apprentice, and all of those 3 novels, well, especially Padawan and Master and Apprentice, show us this character growth from this angsty teenager who doesn't know where he fits to a teenager who's kind of figuring things out with his relationship with Qui-Gon, to this guy in Phantom Menace who's able to embrace knighthood and whatnot. And so that kind of that trajectory, if you use that term, of who is this person, who is this character, even with Leia, she goes from this 9-year-old kid we see in Kenobi to a 16, 17-year-old confident teenager who can brandish the sword and say, I'm the next Queen of Alderaan, and Claudia Gray's Princess of Alderaan. Awesome moment. Who we see joining the Rebel Alliance and becoming more involved in that, we see in Rebels and of course in New Hope. So all that then to say is, what it does is flesh out, similar to your 360 metaphor is a great one, because what it can do is it provides more detail and more, I could say backstory or ideas and concepts that maybe a screen story can't take the time to do. You can't get in a character's head in the same way. The last thing I'll say, is it affects the way we can feel about a screen story, right? I mean, I brought up the classic example is the way Darth Plagueis helped people into the Phantom Menace in a profound way, and that's still headcanon for so many of us, right? Shadow of the Sith, for those who, if you did not like The Rise of Skywalker all that much, if you thought those plot details just were wonky or out of whack or whatever, what Shadow of the Sith does, it doesn't try and convince you necessarily. What it does do is say, or what it does do is give you time with them, flesh them out, connecting Palpatine's story and everything going on with Exegol to Luke and Lando's story, which we already know, we're already invested in, with Rey and her parents, and that scene with Ochi of Bastoon, bringing that out, fleshing all that out. So, the last point I will say is, if you asked me this 8 months ago, I would have said, I really want every detail to line up so much. I want it. I know it's not realistic. I know it's not going to happen, but I want Kanan's story, Kanan's Order 66 story to look like it did in the comics. Now I'll say, okay, Kanan's Order 66 story, in his complicated relationship with clones that we see in the comic book, that's still there. That's still part of his story that we also see him work out with Rex in Rebels. And so that connection, losing Depa either way he does, that's still there. However that happens, it's more organic is where I'm coming to, is we have, I used to use the phrase discipline of continuity and having strict discipline that, between screen to screen. So for example, when you guys were bringing up the question a few months ago, or maybe a year ago, of Maul being in Kenobi and how, later stories have already addressed that, or Clone Wars had already addressed that rather, that's a discipline of continuity that's pretty strict. Within paper canon, it lines up pretty darn well, way better than, Joel, you say often, way better than it did in Legends. The connection between paper and screen, again, they aren't going to be bound by it. I can accept I've come to terms, I've made peace with the fact that the folks making screen stories aren't going to be bound by stuff that happens in paper.
Still better than Legends.
I hope for, still better than Legends. What I hope for with paper is that it fleshes out those character choices, character beats. I do wonder if Leslie Helen's going to be the exception, but that's speculation.
Yeah, we'll see about that. I mean, we have seen, I think the most dramatic connection between the page and the screen, the paper canon and the screen canon, to borrow your phrase, Matthew, is still to me having Cobb Vance show up in The Mandalorian. Because
and Operation Cinder in that one episode too. That was
Operation Cinder, like, that was a cool connection, and I think and I'll talk about this in a second. I think that's an example of canon working together quite nicely. But Operation Cinder could very easily be a throwaway thing. And we would see on the Clone Wars lots of throwaway references to the old expanded universe and the stories that were told there. With Cobb Vance, here is a character who was in 3 books for 3 chapters total, not 3 chapters per book.
Not even chapters, interludes.
Yeah, interludes. I think when he appeared on the show, I went back and counted how many pages of books there was. It was less than 20. Like, it was not many. But there he was on screen, part of this larger world, and it was this connection that I never thought could ever happen. And I like the way everybody's been talking about it so far. And Chris, we'll hear from you in a second. But I like the way everybody's been talking about this so far as seeing canon as a way of expanding the universe. Because for as much as I love the idea of canon, my frustration would come, and this was more a thing with Legends than with the current stuff, would come when it felt like it was making the universe small. It was contracting the universe. It was limiting what could be done. And all of these stories that were being attempted to be told in the Clone Wars, people would get mad saying, "Oh, it's contradicting this other thing, so you can't do this Obi-Wan Kenobi, Mandalore, Duchess Satine story arc," which I think we can all agree wound up being really good. Saying you can't do that because these other books say this other thing has already happened, and that to me felt like canon was being used to sort of restrict what could be done. But I like this idea and the way you've all described it as something that rather than create restrictions, it opens up opportunities. And what's the book called? Secrets of the Sith?
Shadow
of the Shadow. I'm reading it. I swear.
Shadow of the Secret.
Shadow of the Secret is written by Christopher Adam, my favorite author. Thank you, Matthew. I was glad somebody got that joke. Thank you.
I can reverse it.
The author's name is Adam Christopher. There we go. All the best jokes.
I would not have corrected you. Wow. That was that. Wow.
All the best jokes need to be explained. That is a book that took some decisions that objectively were made, and is taking them and expanding out into a pretty interesting story. One that there's parts of it that I quite like. There's parts of it that I'm a little iffy on, but it is overall from what I've read about the first half, I've quite enjoyed. And so I like this way of thinking about it. It doesn't change my opinion of what those decisions were that JJ made back in the day, but it's taken the good that could come out of them and is making it into a pretty interesting book. Joel, I can see you've got your hand up. This isn't class. You don't have to put your hand up.
I don't like to break anyone's mojo. You actually bring up something that I always talk about as well when it comes to canon is like, and this is something I love from our authors and I don't like from our fans. Not our fans, but not Underworld fans, the Star Wars fans. Authors are way, and this is just probably creativity thing. It's like, you don't have to like any of the movies that they're building on. Like, Dominic, you're not going to probably change your mind on Rise of Skywalker even if you read the book and love it. But I would hope that if you, Dominic, were assigned a book in Star Wars that had to do with Rise of Skywalker, you would what I call work with the canon. And what I mean by work with it is that you don't try to change it. Like, it's not like, again, it's like people like erase the sequel trilogy. It's like, you build upon. Like Charles Soule, I don't think he likes either of the JJ movies quite a lot. I got what I get from his Twitter. But that dude has done so much with the Knights of Ren. Like the Knights of Ren, they just sit there in the movies. They're like, we're the Knights of Ren.
That is weird.
But in the comics, what he's been working on, he's given them character, he's made them funny, giving them an interesting backstory. Like he's working with the material to make something out of it. And and I always heard that with like the prequels as well. It's like, people are like, oh, I hate the prequels. Yeah, it's like, but the authors and the people work with them, they tried to work with the prequels. Like, okay, work with George's Given, which was pretty good, and let's expand on it. Let's expand on a character like Dooku, who in the movie didn't get much, and now in canon and in Legends, he's a pretty interesting guy. They made him a really interesting character and just expanded upon him, and that is something I think always mostly, but especially now, I think Star Wars authors and other creatives, and even this on-screen creatives, are doing a good job is working with what they have been given, especially from the on-screen stuff, and trying to expand it. Hence the term expanded universe. Like Ochia Bestoon, a character who only appears once in Rise of Skywalker, once for like 10 seconds. He's now like one of the most popular characters in comics and the EU fans. He's got his own fan base. OG has a fan base, and I love him because he's my favorite. He's like the best thing ever. So it's like the new Boba Fett, but actually kind of cooler.
Can we get the running of the Ochis at the next celebrations, like we have the running of the Wilro Hoods?
Please do that. Please do that.
But no, I think you brought up kind of a good point, Dominic, of like taking what's there, even if you don't like the objective decisions made, but trying to make something interesting out of it. You know, like if you go back to my tweets, I can tell you all the ideas I have for Snoke. And okay, he's a clone, he's a Strandcast, but here's how I think you can make him a really in-depth, interesting character. So that's one thing about another thing about canon and the way it's been functioning, which I have always enjoyed about it.
So it's about how you cook with the ingredients on the
exactly.
stove.
That's a great metaphor.
Yeah.
That's exactly
there we go.
Okay,
Yes.
Gotcha. Doesn't matter about the ingredient. You just take what you get and you make a meal out of it. I love it.
Yeah.
Bingo.
There we go.
So, all right. Here's the thing about this. All this stuff is just really bizarre because other franchises do it in such a simple way, which is they have a cinematic universe, and then there's just other stuff. And the other stuff sometimes shows up in the cinematic universe, but nobody is trying to pretend that they are existing within the same timeline. And that's very common for most franchises. You also have franchises that start as books, and then there's an adaptation universe where certain things are changed, but in general, you're following the same thing. It's just an adaptation, and that's very common as well. Star Wars was like this until the 1990s. You had Splinter of the Mind's Eye come out, which George Lucas, after he made the first Star Wars movie, didn't know if he would be allowed to make another Star Wars movie. He thought the movie would do very terribly. Yet he wanted that story to still be out there. So he allowed Splinter of the Mind's Eye to be written so that there was a tie-in sequel to the movie. But what happened, of course, Star Wars becomes the biggest movie ever, and he gets the opportunity to make The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And all of a sudden, Splinter of the Mind's Eye means nothing at all. And huge, major things are changed in the process in canon. I think George Lucas's view was always that books have the same level of canon as Splinters of the Mind's Eye, meaning they don't really mean anything. They're fun. They can be related to each other or not. They're just things
they make money that will help fund my special effects company.
Yeah. Exactly. That's really what it is. It's just like selling an action figure and the stories that you tell about your action figures as you're playing as a kid. However, what changed was in the 1990s, something really fascinating changed, which is Tim Zahn was given an opportunity to write some Star Wars books in the 1990s. And something happened that I haven't really seen in other franchises, which for a lot of people, the Star Wars books became the Star Wars fandom for them rather than the Star Wars films. There was a whole generation of people who grew up in the 1990s with the Thrawn trilogy and the subsequent books that were then expanded upon after that about the future of the Skywalkers and the Solos, that actually preferred those books. That was their fandom over even the prequels that came out from 99 to 2005. And there was just this massive thing. And that's when you had to have a word come into play, which is the word continuity. And this idea of continuity canon, which is, wait a minute, there's this massive fandom for all of these spin-off books. We got to make sure that all of these spin-off books exist within the same timeline, unlike what happens in other franchises. So the idea of C-level continuity canon came out, but there was always that acknowledgement that it is not the highest level, that George Lucas can change anything whenever he wants if he makes a TV show or a movie, and that's the G-level George Lucas canon that was expanded into the G and T television canon of the Clone Wars, because the Clone Wars was the the Clone Wars CGI series was the first high-level canon show because it was the first show that George Lucas worked on. The micro series by Genndy Tartakovsky was not included in that. So that's kind of the history of how these kind of things happened. Is we saw something happen in Star Wars that doesn't really happen in other franchises, where there was a fandom just for the books, and the books had to fit within the same continuity. And so you end up with these kind of competing universes, essentially. The continuity canon universe of books and comic books and other tie-in materials. And then you have the on-screen cinematic universe, which is more similar to what other franchises have. But those were two competing things. They were always two competing things. And so it made sense when you get to the Disney takeover that you got to choose. You got to decide, okay, both of these can't really exist. We need to decide what is canon. And they decided, well, the stuff that's on screen is, and everything's that off screen isn't. But they made a mistake. They made a mistake. And the mistake that they made was, instead of doing what I feel like they should have done, which is just said, okay, everything that you see on screen, that's all going to have continuity, but everything else is just what it is. They instead said, we're resetting continuity. We're still going to have continuity canon. And by the way, we're going to make sure that continuity canon is the same thing as the cinematic universe canon. So there's only one canon. And you create two major problems when you do that. One, it alienates all the people who are just told that to find out if a book is canon, you got to look at the publishing date, which is very strange. And you end up with situations like that Darth Plagueis book that just makes the cutoff, technically isn't canon, yet in everybody's head still is, because it can't happen right before Disney came in. So you have that problem. And then you have as well the problem of they're going to have to do it again. At some point, there's going to be so many Star Wars books and comics, they're going to run out of room on Disney Plus. They're going to run out of room in the theaters, and they're going to have to start overriding things. They're already overriding very small things that, like Joel said, they're not very consequential things. But at some point, consequential things will start being changed. And then they're going to have to acknowledge the fact that all the books are also legends. All the books now being put up now are also potentially legends and not at the same level canon. So it's my opinion that what they should have done is they should have just made the stance that, hey, there's two separate things going on. If you're reading a book, it's your decision if you want to make it canon or not, or if you're reading a comic book. And then, but the only things that are expected to fit together are the things you see in the cinematic universe and the television streaming spinoffs. That's probably what they should have done. Now they're in a little bit of a tricky situation where they have basically three types of levels of canon going on, and there's inconsistencies between all three of them. So I think they've in trying to simplify things, they've actually made things more complicated and difficult for themselves. And so that's kind of my view of what canon is and what it should be, to answer the original.
I'll go ahead, Nick.
So I want to jump in there and say, so I mean, what we saw is, they sold us on that, right? That everything would be the same, everything would be one level and everything. I think the way you describe it in terms of, if you want it to be canon and you want to pay attention, you want to have your eye on it and see and talk about the relationships between paper and screen, go for it. If you don't want to if you can't be that invested in these paper stories, if you don't have the time or the interest or whatever, or if you just, in your mind, your imagination, you don't see them connecting as well, then that's fair too. That's your perspective as well. And this is the point, is they aren't going to make a screen person depend on something that happens in a story, in a paper story, unless, I mean, if Rian Johnson with the napkin bombing, I wonder what that was about. I think that was going to be something he was going to build up on, but he didn't end up doing that. He didn't have, whatnot. But yeah, so, what I will say there is, it's happened anyway. That kind of thing has happened anyway. They have let go of the strict thing. Yeah, I get your point that it's going to be even more more the case. They're going to even more whatever they end up doing in a number of decades or who knows when. I'm going to enjoy it for now and see what happens when that happens. I'll hopefully be older and wiser and be able to. One more point, Joel. Older and wiser and be able to let go. I will say the one thing again, and maybe I hope I'm not repeating myself too much, is the best thing that these stories do are two things. They're not linear, absolute, solid, point A to point A things. They are taking the time to put a character story, like do a character study. So I look at Shadow of the Sith, and for me, it's what is it like for Luke and Lando to go off on this adventure? What is it like for Rey and her parents to be in this situation, for example? What can we do with Ochi Vistu and whatnot? That also, again, it isn't so much making the argument for Rise of Skywalker make sense. It's how can we help people feel their way into the screen story that maybe, maybe not necessarily telling people how to feel, but giving people more time. And like I said, connecting it with Luke and Lando's story that is more familiar. And then another thing is, so it can deepen, not just expand, but deepen. Expand in terms of someone like Cheli Afra, who we got to mention. It's taking an hour to mention Cheli Lona Afra. She can have nothing to do with the screens if she wants. I mean, she's just so out there. She's so nuts. But it is a sandbox. It is a sandbox. It is a playground, an opportunity to try things out, like Screaming Citadel, that may or may not have landed, like this Ascendant Eternal, that is very weird and may or may not land for some people. So, Chris, again, to your point, I think that is their perspective now anyways. And it's a matter more of how much are we going to acknowledge things that happen? How much are we going to just let paper stay in its lane and not touch things? Like, here's an example with Cobb Vance, and I'll bring a quick example quick. Everything about Cobb Vance and Freetown and this Rada the Hutt character that he was trying to, that's all the story, and I won't go into the detail of that, but there was this whole plot point in Aftermath that in that Book of Boba Fett and Mandalorian don't even touch. So, or just Mandalorian specifically don't even touch. So, stay in its lane. Yeah, I think we're kind of there anyways. Probably more.
I agree with Chris on where it probably will end, but I disagree a little bit about how we've had two competing timelines pre-90s. Because here's the thing, I think people forget this. George had a rule. You can do post-Endor, you can do the Ancient Past with Tales of the Jedi. Don't touch that prequel stuff. That's mine. And that was pretty much the rule. You can do post-Endor because George, at the time, good old George, he changes his mind. As much as he claims to have a plan, he doesn't. He's like, I'm going to do this now. But at the time, he was like, you know what? I'm not going to do any young Luke, Han, and Leia stories. So books, go nuts. And Ancient Past, I'm probably not going to do any of that. So go nuts. But this prequel era, that's mine. So up until only about 2008, really, when the CGI Clone Wars show showed up, it pretty much worked because George did his 3 movies. The in-between the war stuff was done with the comics and the books, and that's where you get the Dark Horse and the Quinlan Voss story and all that cool stuff. And George was like, after we ended this, I'm out. I'm done. I'm tired. Everyone hates me. Everyone complains. Poor George. It's not until 2008 when George actually decides to actually tackle something that the EU developed really a lot with those books and comics. That's when we get a little bit more of that competing stuff. And it probably, again, as you said, would have been a problem when, George, whatever lucid ideas he had for a sequel trilogy, I'm still unconvinced of how concrete a lot of that stuff would have been. That's when obviously things probably would have more problems. So it's also in some ways, and I'm sure eventually Lucasfilm proper will probably change their mind again. I don't know how long you can probably hold this for long. But for now, I think they actually have done a good job, especially now. What I've noticed is sectioning off different parts of real estate. I like to call it real estate. The real estate to develop our cities for certain areas. Like you've noticed the post-Endor era, there's not a lot of books and comics in that, with the exception of Shadow of the Sith now in Princess and Scoundrel because a lot of that is going to Mandoverse. They don't want any books and comics touching that spot because that's Mandoverse. In between the OT movies, 4, 5, and 6, they've given that all to the comics. And if you're keeping up with the comics, they're going to touch on a pretty big and important thing, which could probably one day get contradicted by an on-screen thing. But for now, they're going to let the comics touch that really important event.
Yeah.
Obviously, we have the High Republic, 300 years in the past, and they're giving 200. I saw it was 300.
200 and now 350.
Okay, 350 years in the past, going to be developed by the books. And it seems like Acolyte, for all it's worth, is going to be set way after that stuff. And who knows what the ancient past will be. They haven't even bothered touching that stuff yet. So I do agree eventually they might say, you know what, we're going to just do a Luke, Han, and Leia thing, get Sebastian Stan and Millie Bobby Brown recast, and let's do a Disney Plus show in between those 3 movies, the original trilogy movies. But for now, they have just let comics touch that thing, and probably because they don't have plans for any on-screen in between episodes 4, 5, and 6 stuff. They probably don't have a lot of plans for any Dark Time stuff because they're giving that to Andor and Kenobi. And I'll just say something that I've noticed, and if you keep track of the stuff, you'll notice it too, is if something gets really developed in a comic or book, they probably have no plans for on-screen stuff. So sadly, that probably means no Kira for a while. So that's sort of my response to that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because looking at canon as a whole, and it's starting with the cinematic universe, and then seeing where things fall in around it. Disney and Lucasfilm has made a very fascinating decision with the 2010s and where they took Star Wars. And the reason why is because when you compare it to other franchises went in a different direction. And this is the big difference, is when you're reviving something, do you try to build off of what existed before, or do you try to do it again in a different way? And franchises have kind of split off in different ways, and then it's affected their canons in different ways. So what Star Wars did is very reminiscent of Indiana Jones, another Lucasfilm project with, bringing in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. They tried to bring in a new character with Shia LaBeouf, and that didn't really work super well, and it's probably going to have nothing to do with Indy 5. And so, but that's what they tried to do, is just create another generation of characters and then connect this generation to another generation, kind of in a similar way to what Star Trek did from the 70s into the 80s, and going to Patrick Stewart. So I think what other franchises have done that has been very different is looking at how Star Trek did it in their cinematic universe and how Marvel did it in their cinematic universe, where they decided we're going to tell the same story again in a different way. Instead of building off and creating a next generation of Spider-Man, kind of similar to what they did on the animated Batman universe with Batman Beyond, they said, let's just recast Spider-Man and with Tom Holland, and then just tell the same story again in a different way. And that's also what Star Trek did, where they used, instead of multiple dimensions, they used time travel to recast the main characters of Captain Kirk and Spock and Sulu. And yet they used a time travel dynamic to still allow Leonard Nimoy to exist as his character inside the new revival franchise, rebooted franchise. And then so they have time travel and multi-dimensions from time travel working in Star Trek so that everything can kind of stay the same, quote unquote, canon, even though they are allowed to then tell the same stories again in a different way, in a successful way. That things have branched off of. And then again, they've also done that with Marvel by creating the multiverse in Marvel and allowing all of the Spider-Mans to now exist in the same universe and interact with each other and all technically be canon. So they've resolved their issues by basically sci-fi gimmicks like time travel and like like multiple dimensions. Star Wars decided to not do that. Instead of Star Wars creating some type of time travel or multi-dimensional gimmick to just retell the original story again, the original trilogy again with new actors that could have then created a new 7 and 8 and 9 that were directly built off of it. They went off and tried to kind of shoehorn it all in, and that might be one of the reasons why we saw the Star Wars cinematic universe essentially collapse. Like, we're not seeing any more movies based on the characters and situations from 7, 8, and 9. And we're also not seeing any spin-offs based on recasts because there's not a strong central story for them to build off of with the same actors. And so it basically collapsed the universe, and it brings up the real big question of, would it have worked better for Star Wars on screen and then ultimately better for continuity with books and comics as well, to go more the route of what Star Trek and Marvel did and actually immediately recast Han, Luke, and Leia, and then bring them in through some type of time travel or dimensionality to the original films and build everything off of that? Would that have been better for Canon ultimately than what they ended up doing, which kind of created a dead end that they've been stuck at for many years now?
I have an answer, but I think Dominic wants to talk. So I'm
well, I was actually going to try and direct this at Matthew, because Matthew, you're a big Trek guy.
Yeah.
And, I'm trying to imagine what would have happened if Disney had said, we're going to make Star Wars episode 7, 8, and 9, but they're not going to have Harrison Ford, Mark Hamill, and Carrie Fisher in them. How would that have gone down? We saw how even just the idea of a young Han Solo being played by somebody other than Harrison Ford was something that, didn't land with people, and that that a lot of people were resistant to that idea, so much so that I think that's part of the reason why they're pushing this deep fake CGI flat faced Luke Skywalker in the Mandoverse as much as they are. And so I'm curious, because Star Trek did exactly that. They said, we are going to do new Star Trek movies with Kirk and Spock and co, but they're going to be played by Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto and Zoe Saldana and everybody like that. And let's be fair. The Star Trek cinematic universe is in a pretty similar spot as the Star Wars one. There's a lot of great stuff happening on television with Picard and Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks and all of that stuff. Much in the same way there's The Mandalorian and Obi-Wan Kenobi and The Bad Batch. But on screen, we haven't seen Zachary Quinto as Spock in quite some time. We haven't seen Chris Pine as Kirk in a similar amount of time. And it seems to be sort of stuck in a similar kind of,
my counter
in a similar
to that.
rut.
My counter to that argument, though, will be... Oh, go ahead.
Well, I just want to get into that and say my response is Star Trek is always primarily being a film or a TV franchise.
Exactly.
That the films have always been in continuity with the TV. It's just that they wanted bigger budgets and tell a grander story, but a more concise, condensed story in the 2.5 hour, 2 hours of a film. Of course, TNG, the original series, have always been episodic. DS9 still episodic, but had the through lines. And now we're considering sort of. We had the Abrams films, other films. There isn't really much of a plan to make Star Trek films now. I think what the challenge you get, there's the Star Trek 4 with the time travel thing was weird. Like you mentioned, time travel does happen in Star Trek. It doesn't happen in Star Wars. It's the what the Force is, right? It has to do with what the Force is and the unity of the Force and all that stuff. I will say, here's part of what's happening with Star Wars, though, is it's transitioning from a film first franchise to a TV first franchise, a streaming first franchise, because it's picked up on the wisdom that all these novels and comics have done, is that you can do more character work, you can do more plot work, you can even do more lore work and world building by taking more time to tell these stories. Of course, the technology is there. and the appetite and the understanding that TV is as important as film now, and you can have the budgets of I mean the Game of Thrones type of budget in Discovery, and so there's that point there. Star Trek has actually done something now a lot closer to what Solo did. There is an Uhura that is in continuity with the Uhura played by Nichelle Nichols, may she rest in peace, on Strange New Worlds, right? There is all these other characters. So they just went for it without trying to explain it. And that's what I appreciated with Solo as well. Like they just went for it without trying to explain it. That's what they did. Spoiler, by the way, in 1999 with Ewan McGregor, right? They didn't try to explain it, recasting. There are a whole bunch of different reasons why Solo didn't work out. I guess Alden might have been one of them, but yeah.
I just want real quick, Joel. I just want to say I had this thought as we've been talking about the rebooted Star Trek movies and the continuation of the Star Wars movies. There have been 6 total since 2009. Yeah, I guess that's over 10 years there.
Like 6 Star Wars movies or 6?
No, 6 Star Wars and Trek movies. 6 Star movies.
Between
4 of them were made by the same guy.
That's true.
That's true.
And both of those franchises have kind of stalled. And I got a lot of time. I got a lot of time for J.J. Abrams. I really, really do. I have a boatload of respect for the guy. But I'm starting to wonder if he was the wrong choice to, maybe not to kick off both of those, but to continue them.
I gotta
conclude them.
I gotta say, here's the thing. That's interesting. This is how I tie this into the publishing conversation and how it relates paper to screen. There was no territory for Abrams to go. He was just making it up as he was going along, and the writers of those films were making it up. It wasn't like they were adapting novels. They were basically just taking stories and giving their takes on stories. Like, Into Darkness is a kind of reversal of Khan. And then Beyond is, I think, a pretty original story from what I can tell.
The best one.
But there was really there wasn't a framework to kind of like go into, because it was never their plan to then recast Patrick Stewart and go into the next generation, do a Generations type film and a First Contact type film again. I don't think that was their plan. It was to try to create something new, and Beyond was their first attempt of it, and it failed because whoever wrote Beyond, it was not Gene Roddenberry. So it just didn't have that same level of je ne sais quoi trek to it to kind of keep it going. And so evidence not by opinions, because a lot of people like that movie, but by the results of what happened afterwards, which is it became the dead end, the cul-de-sac of the Star Trek film universe. Now with Star Wars, there is somewhere for things to go, and that is highly successful books, extremely highly successful books in the Thrawn trilogy, and then in the many multi-part series that came after that, telling the stories of the descendants of the Skywalkers and Solos. And so the problem is you couldn't tell those stories without recasting. There was no way to do it, because they tell the story of Luke when he's younger, falling in love with Mara, and then their children and growing up, and it's just, you can't put Mark Hamill back into that role. It just it's not feasible. And so as a result of that, it just automatically became the case that you were only going to see those adapted into films, or if it's recast. And the problem is that it just would have been too much of a continuity. It would be too, I think, difficult for the viewer to sit down and watch episodes 4, 5, and 6 to get the overview of what Star Wars is, and to start getting introduced to those characters the way you're supposed to be introduced to them, and then have the actors switched out for the Thrawn trilogy of films. I just don't think that would have fit very well. It wouldn't have had that same continuity as the, say, Harry Potter films, where it's Daniel Radcliffe and Rupert Grint and Emma Watson throughout all of the films. And so I think the only way to deal with that problem is they would have had to go back and redo 4, 5, and 6, just like they redid 2 of those Star Trek films. But they would, and they should have redone them and with some type of gimmick that maybe allowed for some type of passing of the torch from the previous generation, kind of with Zachary Quinto and Leonard Nimoy, in the way that they did that so brilliantly in the first Abrams Star Trek film. And then if they had the new actors like Sebastian Stan playing Luke Skywalker in a rebooted 4, 5, and 6, and Alden Ehrenreich as a Han Solo in those movies, then they could have taken Sebastian Stan and Alden Ehrenreich, brought in Scarlett Johansson or somebody as Mara Jade, and done 7, 8, and 9 with a very strong story that we know people would be excited for. And then those movies would have been the 90s classic sci-fi to film hit that like Dune is, and Game of Thrones is on television with fantasy, and The Hunger Games, and there's all these great franchises that have been built off of books that could have been Star Wars, but instead they chose to ignore the entire continuity of the books that had a huge following and just build off of the nostalgia of Harrison Ford and Mark Hamill. And it worked temporarily. It worked to get all those people in theaters who grew up with those films. They made $3+ billion off of it. They made their money, but now poof, it's gone. And all the new stuff they built is poof, gone. And the only people that are willing to pick it up is Lego.
So I have a counter to that. I have a counter. My first counter is none of those Legends books are even that good. I'm gonna be honest. Most of the books Andor stuff, even the Thrawn trilogy, it would have made a terrible 7 through 9.
You didn't hear the John Williams music playing in your head, telling hard.
But even that kind of crassness aside, my counter to the Spider-Man thing and Marvel thing and the Harry Potter thing. Those are books and comics, and those aren't really associated with like an actor or actors. Like when they adapt Batman, they're not really adapting a single story. They're adapting beats, like Batman's parents die, but sometimes it's the Joker who kills him, and other times it's random Joe Chill, and then he has a whole thing with Ra's al Ghul. So they're not really adapting so much. It's like you're taking bits from the comics, which is why I actually think the Star Trek analogy is a bit better. But I'm thinking more what they're doing with Star Trek now, in that we have a recasted. Dominic dropped. Oh dear. I'm in charge now. I'm the no, Chris still here though. But we have a recasted Lieutenant Uhura and a Captain Kirk and a Spock that is in continuity with our classic
the original
Kirk and
series.
Spock. So whether or not, even if it's even if it's a new story, an old story of casting Sebastian Stan and Alden Ehrenreich as post Return of the Jedi, Luke and Han. Even though it's like watch Return of the Jedi and then this new guy like 5 years later it's a different guy. That's a debate I'm willing to have. I don't like it. I think Star Wars is more associated with those actors than say any franchise, but Star Trek's doing it with relative success, so there's that. I don't think you need a big gimmick, and I think that will just complicate things. And I don't think Star Wars is meant for those kinds of Doctor Who-y, Star Trek-y gimmicks. Star Wars is, after all, more mythological, kind of in that Middle-earthy kind of vibe. But also, I would say, that's why I don't think the Star Trek movies from the 70s and 80s. I like Wrath of Khan, but that's why I think TNG was more important than those Star Trek movies from the 70s and 80s. Because it was the next generation. If anything, I would have had 7, 8, 9 be a little further. Maybe like Leia was the last person around, but then it was but Han and Luke were already dead. Or something like that. Embrace more of that legacy comic stuff, which was kind of more of a next generation thing, but less edgy. But those would be my counters to that, at least. Even regardless of if you adapted a legend or did a new story.
My one and only counter is I don't ever want Star Wars to become adaptations of stuff.
Right.
I know there are very successful adaptations. I'm a huge fan of some certain adaptations. You know, the Game of Thrones adaptation of A Song of Ice and Fire, by and large, is incredible. You know, it gets a little dodgy towards the end, but those first several seasons are beautiful adaptations of those books. But I think with Star Wars, it has always sort of been unique amongst a lot of these franchises, and same can be said for Trek as well, in that there's no source material for it. There's no, you know, the Marvel movies and the DC movies, they're all based on comic books. Harry Potter is based on novels. Game of Thrones is based on novels. Hunger Games is based on novels. There's no source material. There's no obvious roadmap. You make up the story as you go along, as George did. And I think, you know, the sequel trilogy could have done that, and in a different timeline of our own universe probably did that. You know, the sequel trilogy just got a little bit caught up in you know, nostalgia, and like I said, you know, I as for as much respect for J.J. Abrams as I have, you look at his second efforts in all of those franchises, and it's just rehashes of other stuff. And you know, of those 6-star movies that we laid out, the 2 that that weren't made by him are far and away the most original.
That's true.
So that all that being said is, for as much as for you make a compelling case, Chris. I fully understand where you're coming from, but just my own personal hopes and wants for Star Wars and is that they will go in that they're telling their own new stories. Once I read a story, I don't need to then see it on screen, and vice versa.
Yeah. So I really want to jump in there. Chris, I definitely agree. Chris and Dom, what you guys are saying, I'm going to go even further. So Dom, you've heard my feelings and thoughts on The Force Awakens.
Yes.
And I'll preface this by saying I do not want to take away the Rey moment, the Finn moment, the Poe moment, for the representation of that for anyone. If you saw that and that was meaningful to you, please do run with it. I'm here for that all the time, all day. It was way too close to A New Hope. I know that's the harsh thing that people say, but I get in the moment for 2015, reboot the thing, get the hype up. But in the long run, I think it was the undoing. And so, you know, so that makes Last Jedi even all that more important. You know, there's a comment way further back. I tried to find it and highlight it. Start the bonfire. Yoda does the bonfire. You know, his whole thing is not let the past die. That's Kylo Ren's thing, but it is take the past, appreciate it, learn from its failures as well. And you know, I'm not saying A New Hope has failures, but I'm saying we can't go to the past for the sake of the past. And that's why I frankly struggle with Force Awakens, because it just didn't set up this new story. It just continued the old one. Anyway, it's why maybe I struggle when we're talking about Star Trek. I struggle with the whole Abrams verse. We talk about the Kelvin verse. I mean, I love the new Star Trek that's come out. I mean, everything, you know, Clone Wars and Bad Batch and Kenobi and Mandoverse, those are all newer stories in this other parts of the canon. Of course, all the canon novels and comics and everything, profoundly original, connected to to the films and everything going on. So I find the creatives that are gonna tell the stories that can tie everything together. So that's the thing about Charles Soule and Claudia Gray, especially those two, and everyone on Project Luminous and High Republic especially, but those two specifically, along with Rian Johnson and Dave Filoni, really have the balance between what's come before and what we need to move forward and what we need to fill in and explore. They have that down pat, especially for Charles Soule, the 2017 comic, which really dives into my favorite question, Anakin and Vader. Who is the relationship there? The relationship, of course, we see Deborah Chow pick up in the Kenobi series. And just unleash that creativity even more so, and my hope for Lucasfilm now is that they continue to do that. They go for it and see how much it sells like hotcakes. I mean,
So I actually have
again,
one
bringing
more
up
thing I
Afra,
wanna-
bring my point about Afra. You know that she is so wildly popular. Again, not everything lands. Not everything fits perfectly or works out perfectly, and things are weird. And this again, I brought up the thing with the Ascendant Eternal and what's happening there and where is this going. Alyssa Long has a plan. They're going to bring out a story that I think is going to. I mean, Q Jung with the art and everything is going to blow our minds because they're going in this wild, crazy direction that still has to come back to what we know Star Wars to be. So,
I have a
JJ. I mean, people accuse Ryan Johnson of going too far in one direction. I don't think so. I think he hit on what Star Wars is fundamentally, whereas JJ had his enjoyable story that people like. Rise of Skywalker, Joel, I hear your arguments say, oh, it did go there too, but things all didn't fully land there. Sorry.
I
So
mean,
I have
again,
a
I
few
will
things.
always.
I have big things. Go.
I'll say this, and then Joel. I just want to say real quickly. I'll always contend that The Rise of Skywalker is a good movie if it's the only movie you watch of Star Wars.
That's not bad.
If you
It's not
never
bad.
watch anything else, it's a great movie.
That'd be interesting.
But Joel, yes, go
I
ahead.
got a few things. Weirdly enough, of the two Abrams films, I like Rise of Skywalker more than I like Force Awakens. I'd rather watch Rise of
Yeah, me
Skywalker
too.
than Force Awakens. But it's a big thing. It's a big thing. I think the biggest problem with the sequel trilogy, you made it a trilogy. You tried to cram too much into 3 movies. And I'm going to be honest, with maybe the exception of the original trilogy, and I say a big maybe, because I actually could make a good argument against it, I don't think any of the Star Wars trilogies work as trilogies. I think the prequels would have been better if they had more movies. I think the originals could have been better if they had more movies. Return of the Jedi, that's like Rise of Skywalker, Return of the Jedi, you could easily split that up into 2 movies. The Jabba stuff, and then the Endor stuff. And then the sequel trilogy, I think you could make that 4 films. I think you could make that 5 films. I think by cramming into a trilogy, you kind of the story it wanted to tell was cut short, and you tried to cram too much. And I think if it wasn't a trilogy, I think Matthew, your problem with Force Awakens would dissipate retroactively because, here's the nice pilot, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and you Avengers Endgame yourself.
I think you're onto something there, Joel. I think that's a box
so
Star
trilogy
Wars
need to die is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I think that might have been a box Star Wars put itself into.
And I have a feeling that it's done.
Yeah, and
I think again, based on that original idea of Lucas, we were of 9 movies. There's 3 trilogies of 3. I think now that we've done that, there's no reason to go back and do that again.
Yeah, Hannah. Hannah, you've been hanging back there, chilling out at the back of the room.
I have answers to everything we've spoken about. I just haven't found my pocket yet. I was like,
Here for it.
In the discussion of this is going back a little bit, but the relationship between original content and what influences what, and how all these other franchises of being of great success of Hunger Games and Harry Potter and all those kinds of things. The thing with Star Wars for me, and it's something that I love, but it's also something that I think is a real issue, and I think has been an issue, is the risk-taking level. Because obviously in the original trilogy, that was what made it really incredible and successful, and it was new. It was like, what the hell is this? This is, the whole story of why George made the films was quite risky, and he was making big steps and trying to do newer things every movie. But what I think we're trying to do now is we're getting in too much of a habit. I say I just mean creative steps as the Lucasfilm company, not like us 5. But,
we write Star Wars. Exclusive.
But we keep getting into this pattern where we release something and the hindsight is always better. And I guess that's always going to happen anyway. You can always see your mistakes clearly, after it happens. But it's just it's too prevalent in Star Wars. It's way too prevalent. We're like, let's do this thing. And then everyone goes, oh, that would have been really good if Rey was related to someone. It's just... For me, that was the sequels. As much as I actually have a lot of enjoyment and love for the sequels, there was too much kind of this afterthought sensation of like, oh, we really didn't think about that. And I think in the conversation of publishing and books, how does this relate? It's interesting how much like there's authors we have in Star Wars now, like what you just said, Matthew, of Claudia Gray, Charles Soule, even like people like E.K. Johnson are really getting deep into the context of Star Wars, which I think really lacked in the films for me. Like, I don't know how much they researched, but I just feel like they did not know much about the context of Star Wars. Whereas in the books, I find that so much stronger, that they understand that 360 vision, they understand what's happening to create further stories. And if we want to keep going into the future, like, stories after 789, and, again, that hindsight thing of what they should have done for 789 was like understand the context and just one step at a time. Because I felt like it was just this massive leap. Let's just do another empire. Another rebellion. And then in hindsight, it was like, oh, maybe we should have I don't know. It was kind of rushed for me. Does that make sense? Like there was a lot of points in there.
Yeah.
But that's
for sure.
I mean,
continuation.
What you're getting at is, I think what we found, and by what we found is Joel and I, as we talk about this over the last 8 months, what the novels do best, and the most successful novels are the ones that do look back and do fill in things that aren't spoilers anymore because we've seen the movie already, And so we brought up Shadow of the Sith a lot because it does look back on things that happened in this film that came out in 2019. Dom, I'm looking at at Aftermath there, and it's one of the least popular novels out there. I think criminally underrated, but one of the least popular. It came out before Force Awakens came out, before we knew anything, and so it just couldn't go into anything. It kind of relates to this is similar in a way to the way I like panels at cons and Celebration that look back on a thing that has already come out, as opposed to teasing something that hasn't come out yet, because it's a lot more substantive and you can take a lot more time. The one exception I will say is with James Luceno's Catalyst. Two exceptions: James Luceno's Catalyst and Claudia Gray's Bloodline. Both had enough details, because they were probably Lucasfilm gave them enough details to set up things, about the Ersos and about everything with the Kyber crystals and the Death Star and whatnot. Of course, we know it's going to be about the Death Star because we know Rogue One is going to tie into New Hope. But with Bloodline and the political context of the galaxy, and I think there was going to be something about the relationship between Ben Solo and Leia and his mother, and fleshed that out a little bit more. But it was still, we had enough context after Force Awakens for Claudia Gray to say, okay, and here's part of this leading up to the Rise of the First Order, and of course in why Life, Debt, and Empire's End are also so much better, because we have that context already. So you're definitely hit on something. Books and comics are in that sense kind of a mulligan, like a second chance. I don't know golf, so I don't know if I'm using the word mulligan, but like a second chance to fill things in and to explore things in that way.
Like example, how many times do we see people absolutely ripping into a book, saying it's like the worst thing ever, which get it out of it's not Star Wars. Like how many times do you see that happen? Not a lot. Not a lot, like if ever, and it's always like just such a small level. Whereas obviously the films, had such a great volume of negativity. It makes me just have all these questions of like, okay, what is the storytelling in the books doing that just aren't in the movies? And I mean, even the shows like Mandalorian being so successful, and Book of Boba Fett being fairly successful, like even them, they're kind of really having to they're leaning on Dave Filoni's just ever-present knowledge of everything of Star Wars. Sure. So, but how can they be more successful? And like, yeah, that question of what are the books doing so well that they could apply to
And
the
I
movie?
think that this question has already been answered internally, and I think we're in a period where we haven't seen the results of it yet. Because when I look at what they want Taika Waititi to do on screen in the cinema, and when I look at what they want to do with the Acolyte on streaming, I think that those two things are
That's a
gonna
good point. Yeah.
have that quality that books have of here's this just wide open space. This is yours. Go do what you want with it. Instead of you have to incorporate all of these other elements that we've already had before, so you're in the universe.
Real quick, Joel, real quick. This is something that I've found in the last couple of years with Star Wars books, is that I enjoy the ones that aren't about established characters much more than I enjoy the ones that are. So I've found much more enjoyment in things like the High Republic or the Alphabet Squadron trilogy than I have in, say, Brotherhood or Secrets of the Shadow or whatever that book's called.
I'm literally in shadows, and I apologize for my lighting, by the way.
And in some of those ones that are more focused on the characters that are previously established, possibly for the same reason that some people took great issue with what they did with Luke Skywalker, which is I feel like I know those characters well enough at this point, and when I read someone else's take on them, I'm like, sometimes I find it informs my opinion. Other times I'm just like, nah, that's not really what I think Obi-Wan would do. But when you do something like the High Republic or the Alphabet Squadron trilogy, where you have all new characters and the stories are influenced by the other stories that we know already, whether that's, in sort of a spiritual big picture sense of the High Republic or in a very literal sense in the Alphabet Squadron, where you're building off the events of the original trilogy just from different characters' perspectives. Then I think then I feel like you get an interesting, more expansive picture of the Star Wars universe, which is what you're describing, Chris, that I think they're trying to do with these new eras on television.
And they're learning, I mean, again, from that, going and doing it and trying and failing and seeing what works, trial and error. Like, who are the most popular characters on screen in Star Wars? I would contend that they're Jyn Erso and Cassian Andor. Like, obviously there's a lot of people who know who Kylo and or Ben Solo and Rey and Finn and Poe are, but the thing is that there's a subset of people that are really into them and think they're really great characters. But I think in the general audience, I would say that if you asked, are the characters of Cassian Andor and Jyn Erso better characters that are kind of more fleshed out, more unique, that you relate to more, I think a lot of people would say that. And I think that Rogue One is in the Disney era, yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking for that clarification.
Yeah. Sorry, I was like,
I'm talking about Disney learning from their mistakes, not Lucasfilm as a whole.
Actually, I want to bring up.
I would say Din Djarin and Grogu, but
and I was about to say, I'm talking about the cinematic universe. On the in the streaming, that's what I was gonna say next, is on the small screen, it's definitely Din Djarin and Grogu, who again are completely new characters. And so I think that they've seen this and seen the overwhelming positive feedback and favorability for new characters versus recasts of old characters or CGI versions of old characters or characters that are archetypes of old characters. For example, I think a lot of
Acolyte is going to be a great show.
Archetypes.
It is.
I'm excited. But actually, Chris, you brought up a good point about Jyn Erso. And it actually just kind of makes me wonder if, is this really a big problem, or is J.J. Abrams just kind of lazy? Because my favorite writer in Star Wars right now, the King of Kings, Tony Gilroy, could probably care less about a book. Probably care less about a comic. But he's going to make Mon Mothma a main character in his series. Mon Mothma, who don't know anything about books and comics. He only appears once in Return of the Jedi and never seen again. Admiral Akbar has more of a character than Mon Mothma does in that movie. And then Rogue One. But Tony Gilroy, he's going to be smack dab in the middle of the dark times, telling this big story about the formation of the Rebel Alliance. So maybe it just depends on, like, Tony Gilroy, just a guy who does his research, even though he personally isn't a big nerd like the rest of us here. And he's like, okay, I'm gonna make this story and tell a very human story about rebellion and protest and the immigrant story. But I'm gonna use the context of the dark times of the galaxy and make my story around that. And I think Tony Gilroy is sort of the gold standard for Star Wars writers, to be quite honest.
Yeah, and you bring up Mon Mothma, Joel, and so I think that is an example of where you can take a character that's already established and it works if it's a character that we don't know a lot about and there's a story to be told that hasn't been told yet. That's what we learned with the Clone Wars. There's so many characters that have great arcs in the Clone Wars that are just minor background characters in the Star Wars films. And that's something that the animated universe has done a really good job of doing, is expanding on background characters and supporting characters. And that's what is, I think, going to be happening with Andor, as well, as that's going to expand on some kind of more background characters like Mon Mothma. So that works too. So you can tell stories with completely new characters where you're not boxed in by anything. You don't have any of those expectations about how the actor should behave if it's a recast, or how the characterization and the writing should be if it's not. And then you don't have those issues when you bring in characters we don't know a lot about either, because people don't have that idea already in their heads of, well, Mon Mothma would never say that. Like,
no. I agree with you that outside of Kenobi and the Book of Boba Fett, really, I do think they are pivoting more to new characters and moving away from legacy characters. Like, we can debate the Luke Skywalker CGI thing all we want, but what that told me when they did that and didn't use a recast, that told me that, oh, you have no plans for Luke Skywalker, really. Like, he really will just be kind of a glorified cameo, and the story will be on, Din and Grogu, with cameos from Ahsoka and sometimes, but Ahsoka probably will play more into Grogu and Din's story because they did recast her. But Luke Skywalker being a CGI model, unless Lucasfilm was insane and wanted to do a whole story with a CGI model as their star, which maybe George Lucas would have loved to do, because I could totally see him doing
he
that.
totally would.
That brings up an interesting question, which is a lot of people when Ahsoka had that kind of backdoor pilot cameo into the Mandoverse, a lot of people were like, why isn't this Ashley Eckstein? Ashley Eckstein could do this. She's been on screen before acting, but then that's a very interesting way of looking at it, Joel, which is what are they planning to do after that? And it's like, is Ashley Eckstein up for, and in the point in her career where it would make sense to dedicate many years full time to starring in a show? Probably not. She has a lot of other things going on in her life. Rosario Dawson, on the other hand, she's primed for that. That might have been more of the reason why they did it. And it makes more sense when you look at it that way.
That being said, I do want Genevieve O'Reilly in the Mandoverse. I know it's not supposed to Return of the Jedi, so I'm being a big hypocrite right now, but I love Genevieve O'Reilly. She's kind of now the definitive Mon Mothma at this point. So
she is. And again, those Aftermath books, she shows up, and she has a pretty prominent role. Not that the Mandoverse is going to be bound to that strictly, but when they tell the story of the formation of the New Republic, she's got to be there, right? She's got to be prominent there. I will say, just on the point of new characters, this is a small example from yesterday's comic book, Star Wars number 26. I haven't done my Tractor Beam review yet, but this is what I'm going to say. Is there at the end of the book, there are two brand new characters. I'm going to try not to spoil this, but there are a couple that are introduced. They have a mission. They're being given a mission. They embark on the mission. They have two little kids. Everything brand new. You only see them really at the last few pages of the book. They left a mark. They left an impression, because Charles Soule, again, is the master of taking what is old. Most of that comic is Luke and Leia and Lando, or not Lando, but and Chewie and a bunch of others, and even Akbar's in there, and everyone's in there. But at the end, there's these two characters, and my point being, it is incredibly difficult to do that. It is incredibly difficult to get us to connect with these new characters that we don't have much time with, and so it takes a singular talent to be able to get us to do that. And there's a lot of techniques, a lot of things being built in, things he builds in earlier in the book that leads us when we actually meet them. We've kind of know a little bit about them already. J.J. Abrams, I don't know if he can do that so much. Ryan Johnson, again, he tried to do that with the actual the actual storyline itself and introducing more about Rey. And I would argue Rey's story is way more fleshed out in The Last Jedi. But I mean, George Lucas and Dave Filoni did it with Ahsoka, and that took time as well. But it depends on who you're writing and who you're doing, who's doing the story. And all these authors, these talented authors, they're masters at it already. Are filmmakers there? I think Tony Gilroy, he is a master of it, and Gareth Edwards did his bit as well. But not everyone is.
Wow. We are an hour and 50 minutes into this podcast.
Yep.
I apologize.
We have not touched. Nope. No apologies. We have not touched a single news story, and we're not gonna. There's no need. There's no need. Is anybody desperate? If anybody is desperately dying to know about, these little tidbits about Andor that Tony Gilroy has been dropping this week, you can read about them on the internet, or we'll talk about them next week. But I have to say, this has been a really fascinating discussion to listen to and to be part of. And I want to thank everybody involved in this episode for being a part of it. Let's kind of put a button on it. And again, I'm going to put sort of the informal clock on everybody. We'll up it from 45 seconds to a minute this time.
Well, thank you.
Use those extra 15 seconds wisely. Going forward, what is your hope for Star Wars canon? Again, we're going to go around the table. Joel, you're going to kick us off.
My hope is that the movies do that forward timeline thing of like, even if they're not like a singular story, they're all post Rise of Skywalker stories. I don't mind the TV shows kind of doing more of a jumpy around thing with like Mandoverse, Acolyte, Andor, Dark Times, and the books kind of keep expanding in their own little ways and working around the TV shows. Let's hope we don't have something where we have to like steamroll over the comics and tell a recasted Luke Han and Leia series for a little bit. I'm enjoying the comics so far. And I think right now we have a pretty good equilibrium of kind of everything going on in terms of the various forms of medium covering different aspects of the universe. So that's kind of my hope. Just kind of keep it like that, but the movies maybe push forward timeline-wise. So have one thing do that, and I think that should be the films.
Okay. Okay, Matthew?
Yeah, one thing we haven't touched on is reception. I mentioned it a little bit. Different people, you either care about what's going on in the novels and comics, or you don't, and that's fair enough. A big thing I hope for with Star Wars canon is if people stop thinking of Star Wars as a film franchise and start thinking of it as a streaming first franchise, because that is what Lucasfilm is doing. They're taking the time to tell those stories, and then and then my second hope is that the screen stories and the paper stories, they do a good job. Like they continue to do a good job of staying in their lanes, having characters come in, having characters fleshed out. We mentioned Cobb Vance, Kirsanton is another one. Afra is around the corner. She's got to come in. And maybe one big explosive dark horse, one like Sabe coming in. I don't think that's going to happen, but I'd love it just to see. I think it would make lots of sense. And then I want High Republic to continue to explode the way it is and continue to explore everything to do with the Force and the Jedi of that era and how we got to where we got to in the Skywalker saga. Yeah.
All right, Hannah?
Yeah, I kind of have a not very realistic fantasy desire for what I want Star Wars to be. And that is that the TV shows are similar to what we actually got in Book of Boba Fett, that we have these character-focused TV shows. We have The Mandalorian, we got the Book of Boba Fett, and continue on like Ahsoka. But we continue with characters like that they're really... Because Star Wars, the characters that Star Wars makes, they're not really fluffy. They're not really kind of just the classic, character. Even if they follow an archetype, they're really interesting with really interesting stories. And I think that's what is going to be such a strong point of Andor, is that his like journey and plight of how we got to the rebellion is so interesting. And I think there's so many characters in Star Wars that have such an interesting story that are relatable and important for storytelling in the future, that I want so many shows that are literally just based on a character. In conjunction with that, I really would love to get like singular movies. I mean, I'm not a Marvel person, but similar to how Marvel does, I don't even know what they call them, the Avengers, where it's like everyone comes together and does the thing. But then the TV shows are like the individual superheroes, the individual Star Wars characters. But then the movies kind of are this cinematic great time of a period of the Star Wars timeline that they come together. So that's what I want for Star Wars canon. Yeah, there we go.
Chris?
Yeah, I think I want elements of what everybody has mentioned. I want an upward flow of ideas, basically. Like I want all of the ideas for characters and stories in the books and the comics. I want the best of those ideas on Disney Plus, and whether it's telling an additional story or working that into the story that's already there, or if it's actually going and there's just a really great comic book, let's do a Disney Plus series about that comic book, or an episode that's just a retelling of that comic book. I would be down for that. And then having that then flow upward into the films, and the best of what we see in streaming ends up with some type of cinematic a chapter to it, kind of like Hannah was mentioning with the team up movie. So and I think that then you end up with all of the ideas permeating through all the different levels of media, and I think that's what it should be. I think just because a character is really good in a book or a comic book doesn't mean that character shouldn't be anywhere else. We need to see that move upward, and that way what you end up with is, I think I want to see like an iceberg, where like the top of the iceberg is the movies. You have the best of the best there, the best ideas from the other forms of media. But then if you want to go deeper, you can follow those characters and where they came from all the way down to a comic book or a novel or an episode of a Disney Plus show. And then from there you can laterally expand to all the things that are related to that. I think that would be the best way to do it. And I just don't know. The one thing that I just want to be careful about is I don't want to see staggered storytelling. Like I'm not a huge fan of the let's have a prequel book to a movie and then a sequel book to that movie. Like I would much rather have just people tell stories and then those stories be told either again or in different ways, because I think that you could come up with a very good idea for a movie that doesn't mean that it's a good idea for a book or a book related to it. Whereas you could come up with a very good idea for a book, just because it's already a book doesn't mean it shouldn't also be a movie. So basically, to sum it up, let's make a Lost Stars movie. Just do it.
I agree with that. If we're going to adapt, I know Dominic doesn't like adaptations, but if we're going to adapt adaptations for Star Wars, but if we're going to adapt one story from Star Wars canon to a movie, let's do that one. That'd be like my one.
There we go.
That'd be my.
It'd be hard to argue against that.
Well, my hopes going forward: number one, no adaptations, never, not allowed. I don't know.
I can't wait for the live action Clone Wars adaptation, Dom. It's gonna be amazing.
No, please don't. Please don't. I ultimately, I think for me, I want to see the different mediums play to their strength. And I think when Star Wars is at its best, that's what they're doing. And I think the best Star Wars books are great books. Even if you take the word Star Wars off the title, and I think the best Star Wars movies are just great movies when you take the word Star Wars off the title, except for A New Hope, which in that case you take A New Hope off the title and you just leave it as Star Wars.
As the kids in the 70s saw it.
Exactly. And same goes for television, comic books, video games, all of that stuff. I think the when each of those mediums is at its best, that's when Star Wars is humming along, which is obviously that's how anything works. Is when something's at its best, that's when it's at its best. Duh. But I think there's room for all of these mediums to coexist together, and I think there's ways for them to bounce off each other and play to each other's strengths and build together. We're all on Team Star Wars here in a sense.
Building stoves together.
Exactly. So sometimes you need the movies to play forward and the books to play goalie, but in the end they're striving for the same thing.
There we go.
Does that make sense? I don't know.
It does. It does.
Yeah.
I'll work on that one.
Yeah, we'll work on that. Although you'd want to include a midfielder or a striker or something.
Yes.
Maybe we can throw in we could throw in a shortstop just for good measure. And the linebacker, Chris.
Thank you.
There we go.
But I think that is where we're going to leave things for now, because we've been going for 2 hours. We have been going for 2 hours, and that felt like a good natural place to begin to wrap things up for this week.
We thought it would be feasible to have a discussion about the entirety of all Star Wars books and movies and how they relate to each other in 15 minutes. That was the plan. I don't know who came up with that plan.
I mean, I was thinking more like half an hour.
We just like mention some books and be like,
I'm gonna have to now write
Two of us.
emails to you guys about all the stuff you missed. I'm writing that email right now.
Right.
Time for other emails.
All right. So thank you everybody so much for watching. You can follow us on social media at the SWU. That is our handle everywhere. And that's where you can keep tabs on us until we come back. Same time, same place. Next week, for those not with us live, that place is YouTube, and that time is 9:30 p.m. Eastern. There we go.
There it is.
I'm like, which one did I say? That one. And then, so look up what that is in your various time zones around the world. I guess, Dominic, I'll thank you first for hosting.
It was my pleasure. As always, great fun to get into all things Star Wars canon with everybody. It's such an interesting topic of conversation. I love that we didn't get caught up in sort of the nitty-gritty of it. That's when canon, I lose interest in canon. It's what you were saying earlier, Joel, of Ahsoka's lightsabers are the wrong color. Whoop-de-doo. Talk to me about her character arc, and I feel like that's where we've wound up here. This has been a great conversation, and I'm so thrilled to have that there is now a place on the Star Wars Underworld Network to continue to have these discussions with Ion Canon. So welcome to both of you, and I can't wait to continue this discussion next week and in the weeks to come.
Heck yes, and of course you can follow Dominic on social media at DominicJ25, and make sure you check out the Hoth Off the Press Substack as well for more content from Mr. Dominic G. Jones. Hannah, thank you so much for hosting as well.
Thank you so much. It is, I don't know what I need. I need a drink and just lie down after that discussion. That was a doozy. It was so enjoyable. It was so good. My brain thinking about a lot of things now. Now, Dom, now that you've said that point of J.J. Abrams, it made 6 of those movies. No, hang on. 4 of the 6 movies, and they're not amazing. I'm kind of mad now. I'm kind of mad at J.J. Abrams now. That's all I got from this show.
Yeah.
But
I always liked the guy, and then I realized that, and I was like, maybe he's not the guy to trust your entire franchise to.
It was so good to be here. It was a great discussion with the Ion Canon guys. I love chatting with you guys. We're such deep thoughts. It's deep thoughts to unpack. So it's always fantastic. But thanks for having me.
And make sure that you check out the Raeside on YouTube. That's RAE side on YouTube for more content from.
How do you spell that? How do you spell side? Is it with a Y?
Yes, it is totally SYD. That is totally how you.
I stole the E from Ben Hart.
Yes, right. Matthew, thank you as well for being on, being part of the amazing discussion.
Yeah, always glad to be here. I do got to go check on that green smoke. I think it's coming out there. Definitely. Again, something I've been hoping to be able to do for a number of years now, and so glad to. First of all, come on the pod here at 9:30 Eastern, but also to have our own show going on. For folks who really enjoyed this discussion, this is in some measure. We don't go for 2 hours, but this is kind of what we do. We pick a topic. Sometimes we do have a news section, sure, but then we go for about half an hour on this topic. Next week we're doing a bit of a news catch up, but then talking about Jedi Unity and what that might look like and what that might mean. After the Battle of Jakku, after the Battle of what's the Exegol? That's the planet there. All these things in my brain. Yeah, because we do breadth, we do depth, and so you can catch up right here on this very YouTube channel. If you're subscribed to Star Wars Underworld, you are subscribed to Ion Canon. Check us out there. Mondays this next few weeks to make room for Hannah's Kenobi show.
Sorry, thank you for being accommodating.
No, we're a team. We're a fandom fam here.
We are a team.
We're going to go 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. Still maybe sorting out. That's one of the little oven gears we're trying to figure out here as we transition into ovens have gears? I don't know. As we transition
I don't think so.
Network, dials?
Oven dials. There it is. Oven dials. We're trying to sort out, calibrate the heating. Anyway, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, right here on Star Wars Underworld. We're also on Spotify at the Ion Canon pod on Spotify. Also plug myself here every Thursday or Friday. Give myself a 2-day window. Every Wednesday, comic books come out, and then Thursday or Friday, give a 5-10 minute review commentary on those comics. Then you can find that on Spotify. I'll say this now, we are looking to expand into the other podcast feeds, looking to expand to other video options here, video streaming, different things we're thinking about as we sort out the transition. But the thing that will stay the same is Joel and I will take a topic, we'll dig deep into it, we'll look at what's going on in novels and comics and how it might relate to screen, and we are going to talk about screen stuff too, because it's canon. Andor's canon, Empire Strikes Back is canon, even going back into legends and stories about that. So if you are looking for what we call the home for in-depth discussion on lore, commentary, lore, canon, High Republic, check us out, and of course Twitter and Instagram at Ion Canon Pod.
It's an excellent elevator pitch.
Yes.
Thank you. I've worked on it.
Very, very nice. And of course, when you come back on our show, Matthew, I want a full dissertation on Pope Lando and who the heck he was. I just found out about that. I'm like, wait a minute.
Yes.
There was a Pope Lando? What?
Yeah.
Who is this guy? Awesome. And Joel, thank you so much for hosting as well.
Well, yes. Well, as we all know, a canon is what gives a franchise its power. It's an energy field that combines all living mediums, surrounds us, penetrates us, and binds the franchise together.
Nice. So
yes,
there's a light side and a dark side.
Two sides of every sport.
Dark canon. What is the dark canon?
Yes, I had a great time, and I'm going to start writing that email of all the stuff we missed out on talking about. Because I got still so much to say.
Who's Shay Vizsla? Who's that?
No.
We didn't talk about Revan.
What did we not talk about Revan?
This is whole era that we didn't even talk about.
Exactly. But yeah, I had a great time. Great time.
Awesome. And again, make sure that you guys tune in on Monday on this channel, the Star Wars Underworld channel, for their first episode over here of Eye on Canon. We want to thank everybody who super chatted with us. We actually have a super chat I want to read because we didn't get to it in the show. This is from Carl. Very generous super chat. Said, just wanted to show love for Hannah and the channel. I love listening to this when I play Old Republic. So there's our
And by the way, Carl, I love the icon, by the way. It's a lovely channel.
That's
I
didn't even notice that until I clicked on it. It was too
That's phenomenal.
I think that's supposed to be
Who
Barrett.
else is that in there?
Is that Barrett?
Oh, interesting. Okay.
That's off.
Let's talk about Canon. Let's talk
so
about Canon.
You go with that.
Well,
one.
there's the no, I won't go with it. It's not Dark Canon. It could be Light Canon.
I ship it. I ship it.
Bar Ahsoka toffee. There we go. So thank you, Carl. We really appreciate that. And make sure you become a channel member if you haven't, and check out our Patreon, patreon.com/theswu for merch and more. And send us feedback to swunderworld@gmail.com, and make sure you review us on your favorite podcast app. So that is it. We'll be back again next week. Until then, for Dom and Hannah and Matthew and Joel, my name is Chris, and may the Force be with you.
Hey, y'all. It's me, Ben Hart. Did I miss the show? Have I been gone the whole... I just got here. This time.
How's it going, guys?
I want to talk... I want to talk about Canon.
I want to talk about barbecue cannon and barbecue cannon accessories.
Barbecue Canon.
my favorite expanded universe character.
I'm taking my first steps into a larger world.
Larger barbecue world.
My favorite expanded universe character is Trioculus from the Glove of Darth Vader. That book don't get enough respect, y'all. Y'all hear me?
I love Jedi Prince Ken, the original Palpatine grandchild. Jedi Prince Ken.
I couldn't be here because I had to take my annual pilgrimage to Mount Yoda.
Yeah. Now, and all the while I stopped off at Camp Crustacean, so it was a good time. And I'll see y'all. We'll see y'all next week. It's a wrap.